right, we want to get back to breaking news this hour on the indictment against former FBI Director James Comey and New York Attorney General Letitia James. A U.S. District Judge ruled the appointment of attorney Lindsay Halligan is unlawful, and the judge went on to dismiss the indictment against Comey and James without prejudice. Now, we got a statement from New York Attorney General Letitia James. She says, "I am heartened by today's victory and grateful for the prayers and support I have received from around the country. I remain fearless in the face of these baseless charges as I continue fighting for New Yorkers every single day." CBS News Justice correspondent Scott McFarland joins me now for much more on this. Okay, Scott, so can you walk us through the importance of this ruling and what it means for both Comey and James?
These were two landmark criminal cases, uniquely high-profile criminal defendants. They both now have their cases dismissed.
Okay, this is absolutely devastating. Trump's carefully crafted legal strategy, his whole revenge and pressure campaign against political enemies, just blew up in the most spectacular fashion imaginable. We're talking about a cluster of new rulings and revelations hitting all at once that expose just how badly Trump's legal team miscalculated when they decided to use the courts as a political weapon. The Comey and Letitia James prosecutions have completely collapsed. A federal appeals court just upheld nearly $1 million in sanctions against Trump and his lawyer for a frivolous lawsuit against Hillary Clinton. Judges are blocking Trump's attempts to use federal funding as leverage against cities, and legal experts are saying Trump's whole courtroom bravado unravels the moment judges actually dig into the facts. This isn't one bad day in court. This is the complete exposure of a legal strategy that was doomed from the start because it was built on political vengeance rather than actual law. And now Trump is paying the price, literally, in some cases, for thinking he could bend every courtroom to his will just because he's president. But before we go any further, real quick, let's be honest, you can't really trust mainstream media anymore. That's why we built Pump Politics, to bring you real stories, real context, and no corporate spin. If you want to stay ahead of the headlines, join our free newsletter. We'll send the news straight to your inbox every day. Just click the link in the description to join. And if you just want to support what we're doing, join us. Be part of the community that actually cares about the truth. All right, let's get back to the video.
Caroline Polisi joins me now for much more on this story. Caroline, this ruling does not address the merits of this case. We've been mentioning that. So are future charges possible here?
That's right. As Scott noted, this is purely procedural. A huge win for Comey and James, certainly. Remember, this issue was combined before this judge. So she's ruling on both of these cases about just this narrow issue of whether or not Lindsay Halligan was lawfully acting as the United States Attorney for the Eastern District of Virginia when those indictments were signed. And ultimately, this judge, Judge Curry, found that no, Pam Bondi did not actually have the authority to appoint Lindsay Halligan because it was within this 120-day period under the appointments clause that really she has this power, and you can't end run around the appointments clause by appointing different acting and or interim United States attorneys.
Let me break down what's happening because the scope of this legal collapse is truly stunning. A detailed Reuters analysis just dropped showing how Trump's Justice Department stumbled in its retribution campaign against his perceived enemies. The centerpiece of that analysis is what happened with the Comey and Letitia James prosecutions. Judge Cameron Curry dismissed both cases after finding that Lindsay Halligan, the Trump ally who was handpicked to handle these high-profile revenge prosecutions, was illegally appointed and had no legal authority to secure the indictments in the first place. The judge's language was brutal. She warned that accepting the Justice Department's theory about Halligan's appointment would mean that any random citizen could be sent into a grand jury room if the Attorney General later signed off. Think about what that means. The judge is saying Trump's legal theory is so absurd that it would allow literally anyone off the street to act as a federal prosecutor as long as the AG approved it after the fact. That's not a close legal call. That's the court saying your entire approach is fundamentally illegitimate and we're throwing out everything that flowed from it. But the Comey and James disasters are just part of the story. On November 26, a federal appeals court upheld nearly $1 million in sanctions against Trump and his former lawyer, Ali Nahaba, over a lawsuit they filed against Hillary Clinton, James Comey, and others accusing them of a Russia collusion conspiracy. Judge Donald Middlebrooks didn't just find the lawsuit was wrong on the merits, he called it completely frivolous. And his language about Trump personally was devastating. He wrote that Trump is a prolific and sophisticated litigant who abuses courts to seek revenge on political adversaries. That's a federal judge putting it in a written opinion, not speculation, not political commentary, but a judicial finding that Trump uses the court system for revenge rather than legitimate legal purposes. That finding is now part of the permanent legal record. It can be cited by other judges in other cases. It establishes precedent that Trump's approach to litigation is abusive and sanctionable. $1 million in sanctions might not matter much to Trump financially, but the reputational damage and the precedent it creates will haunt his legal team for years. And the legal disasters keep piling up. 2 federal judges have now blocked Trump from imposing new political conditions on more than $350 million in Homeland Security grants to cities and counties. The judges ruled that his executive orders likely violated federal law by tying emergency preparedness money to political demands about immigration and culture war issues. This is yet another sign that Trump's effort to coerce opponents through funding power plays is running into legal brick walls everywhere he turns. He thought he could use the money lever to force cities to do what he wants. The courts are saying no. That's not how appropriations work, and we're blocking you. The pattern is unmistakable. Whether it's revenge prosecutions, frivolous lawsuits, or funding conditions, judges across the country are finding that Trump's legal tactics are unlawful, vindictive, and fundamentally incompatible with how the American legal system is supposed to operate. Reuters is now reporting that Trump's campaign of retribution has targeted at least 470 people and entities. 470. That's not a handful of high-profile enemies. That's a systematic effort to use government power to punish anyone Trump perceives as having crossed him. And what these recent court rulings show is that this massive retribution machine is breaking down. Prosecutions are getting thrown out. Lawsuits are generating sanctions. Executive orders are being blocked. Judges are writing opinions that expose the vindictive nature of Trump's approach and create precedent that will constrain what he can do going forward. The revenge strategy isn't just failing, it's backfiring in ways that are costing Trump money, credibility, and legal options. So buckle up, because we're about to dive into exactly what these court rulings found, why Trump's legal strategy collapsed so completely, what this means for the 470 targets still in his crosshairs, and how these courtroom disasters will shape the political landscape heading into 2026. Let's break it down. All right, so let's get into the specifics of what went wrong with Trump's legal strategy, because understanding the details shows you just how fundamentally flawed the whole approach was from the beginning. The Comey and Letitia James prosecutions were supposed to be the crown jewels of Trump's revenge campaign. Comey, the former FBI director Trump blames for the Russia investigation. Letitia James, the New York Attorney General who has pursued civil cases against Trump's business empire. These were the targets Trump most wanted to see prosecuted. Getting indictments against them was supposed to send a message to everyone else: cross Trump and you'll face federal charges. The prosecutions were supposed to intimidate future critics and validate Trump's claims that his enemies were criminals who deserve punishment. Instead, the prosecutions collapsed in the most embarrassing way possible, exposing the incompetence and lawlessness of the people Trump put in charge of his revenge operation. The central problem was Lindsey Halligan's appointment as interim U.S. attorney. Halligan was handpicked by Trump and Attorney General Pam Bondi specifically to handle these high-profile cases. She was supposed to be the person who would deliver the convictions Trump wanted. But there's a problem. Federal law has specific requirements about who can serve as an acting or interim U.S. attorney. These requirements exist because U.S. attorneys have enormous power. They can indict people, put them on trial, potentially send them to prison. That power has to be exercised by someone with legitimate legal authority, not just whoever the president wants to install. And according to Judge Curry, Halligan's appointment didn't meet those legal requirements. She was never properly authorized to act as U.S. attorney, which means everything she did in that role was illegitimate, including securing the indictments against Comey and James. The judge's reasoning about why Halligan's appointment was defective goes to the heart of how federal prosecution is supposed to work. The Justice Department apparently argued that Halligan's actions were valid because Attorney General Bondi later ratified or approved them. But Judge Curry demolished that argument. She said accepting DOJ's theory would mean that any random citizen could be sent into a grand jury room to seek charges, and as long as the Attorney General signed off later, everything would be fine. That's obviously absurd. The whole point of having legal requirements for who can be a U.S. attorney is to ensure that the person wielding prosecutorial power has been properly vetted and authorized from the start, not that anyone can do it as long as someone approves it after the fact. The judge used the any random citizen language deliberately to show how ridiculous the government's position was, and by putting that language in a written opinion, she created a record that exposes the fundamental illegitimacy of how these prosecutions were handled. The sanctions in the Hillary Clinton lawsuit add another dimension to this legal disaster. This case goes back a few years. Trump and his lawyer Alan Nahabba sued Clinton, Comey, and a bunch of other people alleging they conspired to fabricate the Russia collusion story to damage Trump politically. It was a classic Trump move: take grievances that are fundamentally political and try to turn them into legal claims that you can litigate in court. The problem is that courts have rules. You can't just file any lawsuit you want based on political anger. Your claims have to have legal merit. Your allegations have to be supported by evidence. And when you file frivolous lawsuits that waste the court's time and harass your targets, judges can sanction you, require you to pay money as a penalty for abusing the legal system. Judge Donald Middlebrooks didn't just find that Trump's lawsuit was weak or that it failed on the merits. He found it was completely frivolous, meaning it had no legitimate legal basis whatsoever. It was a lawsuit designed to harass political opponents and generate headlines, not to vindicate actual legal rights. And the judge's language about Trump personally is what makes this ruling so significant. He wrote that Trump is a prolific and sophisticated litigant who abuses courts to seek revenge on political adversaries. That's not off-the-cuff commentary. That's a judicial finding in a written opinion that will be preserved forever and can be cited by other judges. Trump has been accused of abusing the legal system for years, but now there's a federal court opinion that explicitly says he does exactly that. Defense lawyers in future Trump-related cases will cite this opinion. Judges considering Trump's conduct in other matters can look at this finding. The reputational and precedential damage extends far beyond the $1 million in sanctions. The nearly $1 million sanction amount itself is significant. Courts don't impose sanctions that large casually. You have to really abuse the system to generate sanctions in that range. The appeals court upholding the sanctions means this wasn't just one trial judge overreacting. The appellate court reviewed the record and agreed that Trump and Haba's conduct warranted this level of punishment. And sanctions aren't just about money. They're a signal from the court that says, we see what you're doing, we know you're abusing our system, and we're going to punish you for it. That signal gets heard by other judges, other lawyers, and the public. It contributes to a pattern of judicial findings that Trump uses courts for improper purposes, which makes judges more skeptical of his claims in future cases and more willing to impose consequences when he crosses lines. The grant blocking by federal judges fits into this larger pattern of courts rejecting Trump's attempts to coerce and punish through government power. Trump tried to impose political conditions on emergency preparedness grants, tying the money to immigration and culture war demands that had nothing to do with the grant's actual purpose. Two judges in different circuits independently found this likely violated federal law and blocked it. The administration thought they could use funding as leverage to make cities do what they wanted. The court said no, you can't just attach whatever conditions you want to appropriated funds. Congress decides what that money is for, and you have to follow the law. It's the same story playing out across different contexts. Trump tries to use government power as a weapon against perceived enemies. Courts find his approach unlawful. His strategy collapses. The Reuters analysis that counts at least 470 people and entities in Trump's retribution crosshairs puts all of this in perspective. This isn't a president who occasionally goes after a critic too aggressively. This is a systematic campaign of vengeance targeting hundreds of people and organizations that Trump believes have wronged him. Prosecutors, judges, journalists, former officials, companies, nonprofits, anyone who crossed Trump is potentially in his sights. And what these court rulings show is that the legal system has limits on how far that vengeance can go. You can't just indict people through improperly appointed prosecutors. You can't file frivolous lawsuits without consequences. You can't attach arbitrary political conditions to federal funds. Each time Trump runs into these limits, it constrains what he can do with the other 469 targets. The precedents accumulate, the judicial skepticism deepens, and the retribution machine that was supposed to intimidate everyone starts to look more and more like a paper tiger that can't actually deliver what Trump promised. Legal experts quoted in the Reuters analysis make a key observation. Trump's courtroom bravado unravels once judges dig into the facts. This is crucial to understanding why the legal strategy failed. Trump's approach has always been about projecting power and intimidating opponents, file charges, make headlines, create the impression that anyone who crosses him will face legal consequences. But that approach depends on never actually having to prove your case in front of a neutral judge. When judges examine the legal theories, they find them lacking. When they look at the facts, they find misconduct and corner cutting. When they assess the motivations, they find political vengeance rather than legitimate law enforcement. The bravado only works if you can avoid scrutiny. Once you're in an actual courtroom with a judge who takes their job seriously, the whole thing falls apart. Okay, let's break this down into clear points so you understand exactly what happened and why it matters so much. Point number one, a detailed Reuters analysis shows how Trump's Justice Department stumbled in its retribution campaign, with Judge Cameron Curry dismissing the Comey and Letitia James prosecutions after finding that Trump ally Lindsey Halligan was illegally appointed and had no legal authority to secure the indictments. The judge warned that accepting DOJ's ratification theory would mean any random citizen could be sent into a grand jury room if the attorney general later signed off. That devastating language exposes how fundamentally illegitimate the prosecutions were, not just flawed on the margins, but built on an appointment that had no legal basis from the start. Everything that flowed from Halligan's actions has now been thrown out. Point number two, on November 26, A federal appeals court upheld nearly $1 million in sanctions against Trump and his former lawyer, Alina Habba, over a completely frivolous lawsuit against Hillary Clinton, James Comey, and others. Judge Donald Middlebrooks wrote that Trump is a prolific and sophisticated litigant who abuses courts to seek revenge on political adversaries. That's a federal judge putting in a written opinion, not speculation, but judicial finding that Trump uses a legal system for vengeance rather than legitimate purposes. This finding creates precedent that other judges can cite and contributes to a pattern of judicial conclusions about Trump's litigation conduct. Point number 3. 2 federal judges have blocked Trump from imposing new political conditions on more than $350 million in Homeland Security grants to cities and counties, ruling his executive orders likely violated federal law. This is another example of courts rejecting Trump's attempts to use government power as a coercion tool against perceived opponents. Trump thought he could tie emergency preparedness money to political demands about immigration and culture war issues. The court said no, that's not how appropriations work, and blocked the conditions. The pattern is consistent. Trump tries to weaponize federal resources. Courts find it unlawful. Point number 4. Reuters reports that Trump's campaign of retribution has targeted at least 470 people and entities, making clear this is a systematic effort to punish anyone he perceives as having crossed him. The court rulings exposing legal errors, tainted proceedings, and apparent retaliation are not isolated incidents. They're revealing the fundamental flaws in a massive vengeance operation that was never built on legitimate legal foundations. As one law professor noted, Trump's courtroom bravado unravels once judges dig into the facts. The approach depends on projecting power without scrutiny. Once actual judges examine what's happening, the whole strategy collapses. Point number 5. These rulings create precedent that will constrain Trump's legal options going forward and haunt his team in future cases. When judges write opinions finding frivolous conduct, abuse of courts for revenge, and fundamental legal errors, those findings don't disappear. They can be cited in other cases. They inform how other judges view Trump-related litigation. They make courts more skeptical of claims made by Trump's lawyers and more willing to impose consequences for misconduct. Each ruling builds on the last, creating an accumulating record of judicial rejection that makes the next case harder for Trump to win. Now let's talk about what this means for the broader fight over Trump's retribution agenda, because these rulings have implications that extend far beyond just these specific cases. The fundamental problem with Trump's legal strategy is that it confused the projection of power with the actual exercise of power. Trump is very good at making threats, creating headlines, and intimidating people who don't want to fight back. But courts are different. You can't bluff a judge. You can't tweet your way to a legal victory. You have to actually have valid legal theories, properly appointed prosecutors, and cases that can withstand scrutiny. And when Trump's operation is subjected to that scrutiny, it fails over and over again because it was never designed to win in court. It was designed to intimidate people who would be scared off before cases ever got to court. The 470 targets still in Trump's crosshairs should take some comfort from these rulings, but also recognize that the fight isn't over. Trump's retribution machine has been exposed as legally incompetent, but that doesn't mean it will stop trying. The administration will keep filing cases, keep making threats, keep trying to find ways to punish perceived enemies. Some of those efforts will succeed, especially against targets who don't have the resources to fight back or who settle rather than litigate. But the pattern of judicial pushback creates options for people who are willing to challenge Trump's tactics in court. The precedents are being established, the judicial skepticism is real, and the more Trump loses, the easier it becomes for the next person to win. For Democrats and Trump's critics, these courtroom disasters provide powerful political ammunition heading into 2026. They can argue that Trump's legal vengeance is not only dangerous, but legally incompetent, that he can't even execute his retribution campaign without running into basic legal requirements he apparently didn't bother to follow. The $1 million sanction for filing a frivolous lawsuit. The prosecution's thrown out because the prosecutor wasn't legally appointed. The grant conditions blocked because they violated federal law. Each of these is a story that illustrates the gap between Trump's tough talk and his actual results. He promised to punish his enemies. Instead, he's paying sanctions and watching his cases get dismissed. For Republicans, these rulings create an uncomfortable question. Do they want to continue hitching their political futures to a legal strategy that judges keep shredding? Every time a Trump prosecution collapses or a Trump lawsuit generates sanctions, Republicans who've been defending the president's approach look foolish. They vouched for revenge prosecutions that turned out to be based on illegal appointments. They cheered lawsuits that courts found completely frivolous. They supported funding conditions that judges blocked as likely unlawful. At some point, the pattern of legal failures becomes impossible to explain away, and Republicans in competitive races may start deciding that some distance from Trump's legal disasters is necessary for their own political survival. The institutional implications of these rulings are also significant. Courts are establishing that there are real limits on presidential power even when it comes to prosecution and litigation. Trump can't just install whoever he wants as prosecutor and have them indict his enemies. Appointments have to follow legal requirements. He can't file any lawsuit he wants without consequences. Frivolous claims generate sanctions. He can't attach arbitrary conditions to federal funds. Appropriations have to be administered according to congressional intent. Each ruling reinforces the principle that even a president with significant power has to operate within legal constraints. And each ruling makes it harder for future administrations to try similar tactics because the precedents are now established. Here's the bottom line. Trump's carefully crafted legal strategy for revenge against political enemies has collapsed in spectacular fashion across multiple fronts. The Comey and Letitia James prosecutions were thrown out because the prosecutor was illegally appointed, with a judge warning the government's theory would let any random citizen secure indictments. A federal appeals court upheld nearly $1 million in sanctions against Trump for filing a completely frivolous lawsuit against Hillary Clinton, with the judge writing that Trump abuses courts to seek revenge on political adversaries. 2 federal judges blocked Trump from imposing political conditions on more than $350 million in grants. And Reuters reports at least 470 people and entities are in Trump's retribution crosshairs, but the legal machinery designed to punish them is breaking down under judicial scrutiny. So stay tuned, because this story is about the structural collapse of Trump's entire approach to using courts and legal process as political weapons. The bravado that works on social media and in campaign rallies doesn't work in courtrooms where judges actually examine the facts and apply the law. Trump's legal team cut corners, made basic errors, and assumed they could intimidate their way past legal requirements. They were wrong, and now they're paying sanctions, watching prosecutions collapse, and seeing their tactics exposed in written opinions that will constrain what they can do going forward. The revenge machine that was supposed to terrify Trump's enemies is instead generating precedents that help those enemies fight back. The prolific and sophisticated litigant who abuses courts is being called out by the very courts he tried to abuse. And the 470 targets still in his crosshairs now have a growing body of judicial findings they can cite when they fight back against whatever Trump tries next. This is what happens when you confuse the projection of power with the rule of law. Eventually, courts have their say. And when they do, bravado isn't enough. You need actual legal merit. And Trump's revenge campaign doesn't have it.